hope you will. Welcome to episode 25, Construction Nation. This is Sue Dyer, your host of Construction Dream Team, where I interview industry leaders and experts so you can learn about the people side of construction and build your construction dream team based on OPE, other people's experiences. And you can accelerate your success by learning from others who've already been there and done that. I'm really stoked today. I've noticed that, great conversations that we're having with our podcast and our guests, that we haven't had a place to really interact. So there's two places you can go and react with us and share your ideas and thoughts. The first is to go to the show notes page for every episode and write a comment or ask a question or tell us what you think. The second place is to go to cdtlinkedin.com. CDT for Construction Dream Team, LinkedIn.com. And we've created a page there where you can just click on and join our group at LinkedIn and ask your questions, make comments, and we can have a dialogue. So I hope you will do one of those two and give us your feedback. And if you have people that you want to hear from, topics that you would like to hear, just let us know and we will make those happen. So let's dive into today's episode. I am very excited today to have our guest, Jeff Sims. I had an opportunity, the privilege to work with him on a project at SLAC, and I'm just so really impressed with his leadership. Jeff is the project director at SLAC National Accelerator Laboratory, and he has agreed to come today and share with us some of what they're doing there. And let me just tell you a little bit about Jeff in that while we were working on a project, we used a structured collaborative processes. He was tapped to head up a really special program that the Department of Energy is doing. And so he's going to share with us some of his journey to getting where he is and about that program today. So welcome, Jeff.
Thank you, Sue. It's such a privilege to be here today and talk to you.
Well, I just am so glad you're here, and I know everyone would love to know more about how is it that you become the project director at a national laboratory, or especially SLAC?
Yeah, that's a great question. And so what I did to prepare for this is kind of put the timeline of my career in front of me. And so I'll kind of talk through that a little bit. But, the interesting thing about my career trajectory is it's something I probably, like many people, I never would have predicted where I'd be today. But, I grew up in central Illinois in farm country in a town of about 700 people. My dad was a contractor, and so I worked in the trades to put myself through school and ended up with a bachelor's degree in structural engineering, graduating in 1990, so about close to 30 years ago. And spent about 7 years of my early career working at engineering firms, designing buildings and bridges. I transferred after that to a national laboratory called Fermi National Laboratory in Batavia, Illinois, and worked for about 10 years, then transitioned to another DOE, Department of Energy National Laboratory called Argonne National Laboratory, which is about 20 miles outside of Chicago, and worked there, then eventually transitioned here to the SLAC National Accelerator Laboratory in Menlo Park or Palo Alto, California. And so my career trajectory kind of changed over time. I would say the first 10 years of my career was around engineering design and support of large construction projects. When I transferred to Fermilab, I started doing more technical project management and conventional construction project management, kind of a combination of the two projects that range, from a few $1 million to $10 million. And then in the last, I would say 5 to 10 years of my career, I've taken on a larger portfolio of projects. And currently today, I'm the project manager for the Linnet Coherent Light Source 2 project, which is a large mega project, about $1 billion class project here at the SLAC National Accelerator Laboratory that's going to create the world's most powerful X-ray free electron laser. In about 2 years, we'll have that online. In the last couple of years, as you mentioned, I have had the great fortune of being the director of the Project Leadership Institute, the Department of Energy Project Leadership Institute, that, as you mentioned, is kind of a complex wide thing across the United States where we take people through graduate level training to grow their skills on delivering large complex projects.
That's extremely exciting. And I think it's a really interesting model. So I can't wait to learn more about it. And maybe others can borrow the concept of it who have other places that they can teach people where there's consistency and maybe challenging each other to be even better. So I know some people know about Slack, but a lot of the labs are a little mysterious to people. So what can you tell us a little bit more about Slack National Accelerator Laboratory?
Yeah, absolutely. To narrow in on Slack, I want to talk just a little bit about the Department of Energy first so people understand that we're funded by the Department of Energy. And the Department of Energy has basically 4 different mission areas: national security, energy, environmental management, and of course, science and technology. And science and technology is an area where I would say there's about $6 billion of budget focused in 2019 to support 10 national laboratories across the United States that have different elements of science and technology research focus. At the Slack National Accelerator Laboratory, which is just adjacent to the Stanford University campus, we have about 1,500 people focused on multidisciplinary research, but a good portion of that research is focused utilizing a linear accelerator that we have on our site that has various missions to it. There's missions that are supported by this X-ray free electron laser that allows us to look at things at the atomic scale. But we also have some test beds for particle accelerators that help us understand how to accelerate electrons on what's called a plasma wake field to try to get higher and higher energies to where particle accelerators don't have to be so big or so long, and we can have a higher density of energy to get to the same level of power for an accelerator that we have today.
That is very exciting. And I'm sure that in the years to come, we're going to hear more and more about some of the great research and what it yields over time. So tell us, I know I just had mentioned at the beginning about the Department of Energy being involved in our project that we were working on, and we were doing structured collaborative partnering, and they really seem to embrace the concepts of collaboration. And as I recall, that they really wanted to have that spread across the other laboratories. So can you tell us a little bit about the journey of what sort of happened since then?
Yeah, absolutely. So as I mentioned, there's 10 different national laboratories across the United States that all have, campuses that might be from, supporting 500 people up to, in some cases, 10,000. And each one of these campuses have to go through upgrades and need facility improvements. So the construction industry is something that we feel very strongly about, and that they're a key partner to our success at all the national labs. So I'd say in the last 5 to 10 years, people in my position in the various labs really are trying to lean in and create an environment that's more attractive for contractors that also have a culture of partnering to be able to come to our laboratory and work in our environments. And our environments, they're not as complicated as a nuclear facility, but it's still a fairly complex facility that has a lot of rigorous processes that we have to follow. So trying to collaborate and identify those construction partners that are used to working in this environment and have a similar safety culture as ours is really important. And one way that we do that is through partnering. We've worked with you, Sue, to help us make the Science User Support Building very successful with Hensel Phelps. Thank you so much. You were great at that. It gives us the capability as an owner to really put the contractor at the same level and really show them as part of the team. We really like to have that team, the construction team, integrate with the laboratory. They usually end up being here for 2, 3, 4, 5 years, and to build a large project and to create those relationships and make the team the most effective. Really having a very healthy partnering environment is, I think, key.
Yeah, and I noticed too that it was so important to bring the stakeholders in. And I think it's so often traditional approaches, we don't do that, or we don't do it very much. And so, especially in a laboratory environment or a complex building facility, it's really key to bring the stakeholders in all through the entire process so that they feel like they're part of it and they own it and then they work with you instead of against you, which can happen far too often.
It's so true. I mean, we have so many varied stakeholders here, and like I said, the complexity of some of our systems and it really requires that we make those relationships early with the broader team. I think also a key part of partnering is creating that strong relationship with the leadership of the owner's organization and the leadership of the contractor's organization. What I've found in the past is having a very strong partnership and connection with the leadership of a construction company allows you to, I guess, have the latitude to work out challenges along the way, and maybe the incentive to work out challenges along the way to where they don't become worse over time. And so that's one of the great things I saw about working with Hensel Phelps on the project that you helped us with, is because the leadership team there, Jim and Andy, are just really strong proponents of partnering. And whenever there's a challenge, they were immediately there to lean in and work any issues we had to at the top level to help the team make the decisions they needed to keep moving.
I think that's such a brilliant thought, because I've always been amazed at how construction will take on a multi-million, billion-dollar project and not have an executive team in place that really steers and helps make the policies, make sure there's resources, make sure there's what's needed, and really committed to the success of the whole project. Most projects don't have that. In fact, I've been on some projects, really, really large projects, where you couldn't even tell who the leader was from any of the groups.
Yeah.
Because no one really stepped up and took ownership. So I think that's so important.
Well, I think that
I know I was excited about working with you and the executive team.
Well, thank you. That was and what you did for us was terrific. You kept us focused and really helped us spend our time on the priorities. So I think one of the other things that's important is understanding that the larger a project gets, the complexity isn't necessarily only technical. So we have particle accelerators that accelerate electrons near the speed of light. But when you break that down into its basic components, it's a bunch of beam pipe and magnets and power supplies and vacuum pumps, all things that are very tangible that can be put together in the right way that do something really cool. But the complexity of a large construction project is really in the people that pull it all together. And so having that connection at the leadership level, and especially people like Andy and Jim that understand the challenges of managing the varied personalities and skill sets of a team of, a few hundred people or more is extremely important, because that is on a daily basis what you're solving is the communication challenges, the inability for, certain personalities to be effective with each other. And I think that's where, to me, I've found the partnering at a leadership level really, really useful.
And that leads us really, really well into people, because that's really what this podcast is about, the people side of construction. And I know with the Project Leadership Institute that you're now heading up, that's the focus, is trying to get the people more into maybe the mindset and the leadership role to have successful projects. So tell us about your journey with this and what's happening.
Absolutely. The DOE Project Leadership Institute is just, it's been a pleasure to be a part of it. It's a new idea. It was an idea that was developed by the Secretary of Energy, Mo Nees, who was in the position back in 2014, and that had an intent of, because there's a very large portfolio of projects in the Department of Energy, he wanted to create a leadership institute that kind of shared the understanding and lessons learned across the complex, but then also kind of raise the bar on project management, project leadership, and develop a network to where subject matter experts across the United States can leverage each other. And, that was effectively the mission of the Project Leadership Institute. And then that was passed on to several people within the Department of Energy to flesh out, more of a vision. That vision over time was really morphed into a development program that's a year long, has 5 in-person week-long events. So there's a total of 5 weeks of contact time, where it's a combination in each one of those weeks of learning from that's given by the Stanford University and graduate programs related to project management, but also about half the content is Department of Energy, very experienced leaders talking about things like risk and decision science and making good choices related to selection of your team and negotiation, things like that. So we've put together a program with Stanford University as a partner that steps a group of 25 people starting in January of each year through this combination of graduate level training and experiential training through about 170 hours of contact time between the online portions and the in-person portions that gives the cohort of 25 people more of a focus of understanding project leadership. Now, this training is not about the basics of project management. I mean, the basics of project management are kind of a prerequisite for even applying for this. But the application process identifies across the complex in these 17 national labs that the Department of Energy owns and funds. They identify many candidates across the complex, and then our advisory board narrows it down to the 25 that are accepted that go through the program. And then they go through this, it's about 10 or 11 months of a program, and then they graduate in mid-November, an event in the Washington, D.C., where they get more of an exposure to the U.S. Capitol and the federal process related to large projects. And so what we're trying to do is create a culture of project leadership across the complex that understands how to manage large, complex projects. And large, complex projects can be a bit different than maybe smaller conventional projects because of that larger people element. It also allows this cohort, because of the exposure and the exercises that we have, there's a lot of experiential exercises throughout this coursework. It allows them to develop relationships with people across the complex. And those relationships, we're in our third year at this point, but those relationships are still really tight. I mean, from the first cohort we had back in 2017, some of these people are still taking vacations together. It really creates a strong bond to where the learning and the ability to reach across the nation and grab various experts when needed, it makes it a lot easier to do. So in a nutshell, the PLI is twofold. It's one about trying to help raise the bar for project leadership culture across the Department of Energy complex. And it's also about creating that network that people can leverage going forward.
That's really exciting. So 3 years you've been into this. Now you have graduates.
Yep.
What kind of lessons have you learned that you think would be helpful to all of us in Construction Nation?
Yeah. So, I think, again, our focus in the Project Leadership Institute is on really large, complex projects. So, probably on order of 50 million and above, up to, a couple $1 billion. And I think the takeaway is probably different from everybody, right? What they learn is probably different depending on the various experience that they've had. What have I learned? I would say that it reinforces in me that a large complex project, while it can be easily defined by the Project Management Institute, and we understand our processes, that people component makes it a sociological experiment that's occasionally interrupted by technical progress. And I don't mean that tongue in cheek. It's just a really important thing to understand as a leader in a large project that this is all about the people. And a key element for that, for me, is one way that you can fail as a leader, you're guaranteed to fail as a leader, is if you have a lot of blind spots. Blind spots are things where a leader just doesn't have the ability to understand what's happening, doesn't have the information, doesn't have the ability to communicate with the right people to see challenges coming up. And what I've found is developing trust in your team and facilitating that development of trust in your team really creates an open communication that helps you avoid blind spots. And so I think some focus around emotional intelligence and the way we engage each other in meetings and the way we behave with each other, and then emulating that as a leader, is something that on large complex projects is, in my opinion, one of the key elements of a recipe for success.
So I know there's been more and more talk in the industry about emotional intelligence over the years. From your point of view, can you give all of the listeners maybe a little bit of a thumbnail on how you see emotional intelligence as being really important these days?
Yeah. So emotional intelligence and self-awareness can be kind of broadly defined in many different ways. I think a key part of emotional intelligence and self-awareness for large complex projects is focused in a couple of different areas. One is understanding how to have crucial conversations, understanding how to have discussions with your team that I would say balance empathy and accountability when you have discussions with them. I think, it's a key thing for us to understand that, we listen as leaders and we understand that the challenges somebody's going through, but it doesn't mean that you let up on the requirements or the accountability that individual has to deliver their element of work. So it's kind of a balance that one has to make. And self-awareness is one of those things that I think every leader has to really grow in. I am a very pragmatic person, a typical engineer. I would say that, one of my non-strengths is empathy, especially if I take a survey, it suggests to me that I'm pretty focused and empathy, it tends to be the lower part of the scale for me. And so trying to partner with people on the team that can help me ensure that I'm being self-aware and get the feedback from the team that I'm listening and balancing that empathy and accountability appropriately is I think the way I would see key emotional intelligence skills for large complex projects.
I think that's wonderful. And the fact that when we know our strengths and we know our weaknesses, we can maybe be bold enough to let other people help us to be better. So I know you've learned a lot from the PLI. So how are you applying these things to your $1 billion X-ray accelerator project that you're leading now?
Sure. There's, I think, a couple of things that I could talk about. So first, I think the thing about a 10-year long $1 billion X-ray free electron laser project is that, a leader really has to know how to leverage people's strengths and align them to the tasks that have to be done. And it's a constant challenge, right? Understanding who you have on your team and where they can be the most successful is not an easy thing to do. Sometimes you get it right, sometimes you don't. I think sometimes it changes over time. On a large complex project, you can burn people out. And so sometimes people's performance changes over time. And I think you have to understand how to adapt. Again, I forget, I'm trying to think of who the book Good to Great, I think, is a good reference of this. I think Jim Collins was the author, and he said the first job of a leader is to get the right people on the bus, get the wrong people off the bus, and then get the right people in the right seats. And that's easy to say as a single point in time, but the truth is on a very long and very complicated project like we have, it can take more than one individual that can take a certain element of work and deliver it from cradle to grave.
Yeah, and there's a saying too in the industry that project teams don't fail, they go flat.
Yeah.
And it's really hard to sustain over long periods of time. The level of sense of urgency and just the focus, it's very challenging. And it really is up to the leader. Yeah.
It takes a lot of energy as a leader, right? To in those meetings have the enthusiasm and build the excitement in the team, especially when you're dealing with big challenges all at the same time. Trying to keep that game face and stay focused is again part of self-awareness. Trying to understand where your triggers are as an individual and how can you be your best self for the team.
I'm sure that you've probably heard stories from some of your graduates as well, what they've learned and how maybe they've applied some of this stuff to their projects or their programs and projects.
Yeah, I have, and you know, I think everybody takes away something different, as I mentioned before. It's amazing how, you know, I mentioned that there's 5 different weeks of training, and the program goes through. Let's see, you know, I think I'm going to actually try to get to the program itself and kind of step through what those 5 different elements are. The first event in January is about preparing to lead DOE projects and talks a bit about negotiations and lessons learned and things like that. Event 2 is here at Stanford University, and it's about becoming a highly effective leader, and it's 4 days focused on emotional intelligence and self-awareness. It is such a different experience to go through this, and the Stanford professors are so talented in putting people through exercises that put them out of their comfort level. In every event, we put people out of their comfort level, but in this particular event, you start out with understanding your strengths. You get a 360, you get the feedback from a 360. It kind of breaks you down a little bit because you understand what you get to feel what you're good at and what you're not good at. You have to face that. And then at the same time, you're put through some pretty stressful exercises that give you some tools on how you can deal with real challenging situations. So I think that that event about becoming a highly effective leader probably has the biggest impact. We have event 3, which is positioning the project for success, which talks a lot about risk and safety. That's also very impactful. There's delivering high-risk complex projects in the fall that has a lot of discussion about big challenges and failures during execution and what people have done. And there's a lot of experience shared about making quality decisions in short periods of time. And so, I think each one of the events has a big takeaway. Event 6, the graduation, has a crisis communications or a crisis management exercise that takes a half day that really puts the participants in a very uncomfortable situation. So each one of them has a big takeaway that is a memorable moment. But I would say that the majority of our graduates walk away with probably the most aha moments in the Becoming a Highly Effective Leader event that's usually held in March of each year.
That's really exciting because if it gives you an opportunity to kind of look at yourself in the mirror and see what you can do to be more effective in a kind of a safe environment, but with a bunch of peers who are going to tell you the truth.
Yeah.
You don't want to hear it. So that sounds really, really great. I'm sure that others would want to partake. So I'll ask you later if there's a chance perhaps that the curriculum or something could be shared. So we'll see.
Sure.
What do you think, talking about you as a leader at this time, what do you think is your greatest strength as a leader?
So when I think of strengths, I really get very focused around what we do in the Project Leadership Institute. And we do a thing called StrengthsFinder 2.0. It's a book that you can get online by Gallup that I think only costs like $8. And you do a survey and it tells you what your top 5 strengths are. For another $70 or so, you can do a further survey and it'll actually give you all the top 40 strengths. So there's a definition for each strength in Gallup and in StrengthsFinder 2.0. When you take a look at that, I think the survey is pretty accurate with me. I think that in my top 3 strengths are focus, strategy, and analytical. I'm somebody that I'm able to remain pretty calm in challenging situations and just focus on solving the problems instead of, letting my emotions take over. So I think that in the projects I've been in so far, that's probably something that's been very beneficial for me. But I'm also somebody that's, I think, constantly thinking about strategies and trying to analyze the data to try and make the best decisions possible.
That's great. Focus, strategy, and analytical. And I'll put in the show notes for your episode, the StrengthsFinder 2.0 link to that so people can find it. So I know it's been a journey and you're so successful and so remarkable, really, but I'm sure that not everything's always gone perfectly as hoped. So tell us a little bit about maybe a big challenge you've had or maybe the worst moment you've ever faced in your career. Take us back to that moment.
Sure. So there's actually, there's many challenges throughout my career of scope, cost, and schedule challenges. I mean, I probably have 5 going on at the current moment, right? Where, that something's costing more than it should, or it's taking longer than it should, or the scope doesn't necessarily meet the technical requirements. those to me don't stand out as the biggest challenges. Those are challenges that we have to face. When I think of big challenges, to me, it's all about safety. At my core, I feel that the most important part of a project is to make sure that you create an environment, a safety culture that everybody feels. And I certainly feel this way, that people come to work, with a certain level of health, and I want them to go home with that same level of health or possibly even healthier. So having a very strong focus on safety is important. Having people take safety very seriously is extremely important to me. I think that was something that I mentioned, that my dad was a contractor. Very early on in my childhood, when I would help my dad, he had a very strong safety focus. And I think that, that's something that stuck with me in my job today. I think that, I think back to a time about, it was maybe about 3 or 4 years ago, we were putting up a large concrete building, and we were putting on some wall panels on the outside. And I don't often do walks, but I was doing a walk that day. And because I've been in that situation and been tied off, I know that the iron workers that were in the situation to apply these wall panels in understood the tie-off locations that they're at. And there was a large tie-off line that that has the indicators of rings on it that shows how many individuals can tie off to that line. That it's an indicator of the capacity of that line. So it's a pretty well-known industry standard. And I know that the iron workers that were using it were trained, because it was something they were taking very seriously, because we didn't want to have anybody get hurt. And I noticed in this particular case, they were flying in wall panels, and the line I saw had 2 rings on it, because, that suggests maximum of 2 people could be tied off. And I saw clearly that there were 3 iron workers tied off on it. And not only that, they were, kind of leaning out to meet the wall panel as it came in, which is kind of a risk that isn't needed to be taken. I walked up and calmly asked them to step away from the edge and come over and talk to me. And they stopped the crane, and they did that. And I had a conversation about, do they understand what 2 rings mean? And they did. And I said, do they understand that that they're likely exceeding the capacity and putting themselves at risk? And they started laughing. And I got to tell you, that was a situation where I wasn't happy about my own personal emotional intelligence or self-awareness, but I lost my temper at that point. That, those individuals weren't taking their own lives seriously. And so that's a situation where, when I think back to some of my biggest challenges, is trying to make people understand, and line up with your culture. And so trying to build the culture I needed for safety was being impeded by these individuals and their own opinion of their ability to push the limits and take more risks. So when I think about my biggest challenges, it's really about trying to work with individuals to understand how important it is to take safety seriously on construction sites.
Well, yeah, it is so important, and it is cultural. I think you're exactly right. And I think that your culture showed up just almost in the way that you approached it, actually, in that it is very serious and you take it seriously, and it is the way we operate. And I see that a lot. It's not just safety is one of the cultural concepts and constructs, as collaboration is. But it can also be from a decision making. There's also subsets to all of these cultural elements, and creating a culture. I always think of it sort of like you walk into a room and you get a feeling for it, and then as you operate, within 5 or 10 minutes, some of the rules, and as you're there longer, you learn the other rules. And I think sometimes in the trades, the rules don't necessarily always get moved out to the entire workforce, and that's a challenge for all of us across the industry.
It's so true. It's so true.
Certainly, you were there. You were there that day, but we need to find more methodologies for moving it out through. It goes all the way down through all the trades.
It's so true, and I think one of our challenges there is that the tradespeople, which I think have good intentions, are just exposed to a lot of different cultures. If you're an iron worker or an electrician or a carpenter, you're moving around, every month or 2 or maybe 6 months to a different site, and every one of those sites has a different culture and a different ability to take risk, right? And having them as individuals adapt to various cultures is a big challenge. And so I certainly understand that. I just think that in this particular case, it triggered me to a point that, I was really concerned for their safety.
Yes. Yes. So that's a great story and also moment. So tell us about the best advice you've ever gotten.
Oh, that's a good one. I had to think about this one a bit. So let's see, the best advice that I've ever gotten. I think if I go back about 12 years ago, a mentor of mine, Dr. Ed Temple, who is somebody that's delivered mega projects for years. He's retired now, but certainly a mentor of mine for close to the last 20 years. Gave me great advice. I think I was in that part of my career where I was transitioning to, if you lead projects that are, let's say, $5 or $10 million projects, you can often deliver a project like that with persistence, and as an individual contributor, you can kind of find ways to make it happen. But you don't really necessarily, at least in our environment, have to transition into the leadership aspect, because there's not a large number of people on the project that you have to manage a large different set of personalities and strengths and weaknesses. So I was in a situation where I was trying to work with a developer to get a building built, and there was an individual in that project that was clearly had strategy as a strength, but was probably overusing that strength to the point of manipulation. And I was very frustrated, and I just didn't want to work with this person. I, basically was doing things to almost kind of cut the person out of a loop of the conversation, the communication, because I was frustrated. I had lunch with Dr. Temple and explained the situation, and he has a great way of taking, understanding and applying a similar event and to try and get you to realize where you're missing the big picture. And so Ed, after listening to me talk about this challenge, asked me if I played basketball in high school. And I said, yeah, I played basketball when I was in high school. And he said, well, let me ask you, were you pretty successful as a team? And I said, well, we did okay. And he said, well, part of that is everybody gets the ball, right? And I said, well, absolutely. You got to make sure you pass the ball around and keep the defense spread out. And he said, well, did you like everybody on the team? Were you best friends with everybody on the team? And I thought about it, and I said, well, no, there's a couple people I probably didn't like very much at all. And, he paused and he said, did you pass them the ball occasionally? And I said, yeah, I had to. I mean, that's part of the, getting winning the game. And he looked at me and said, well, then Jeff, pass the damn ball. And I think that was an example of him sharing with me that when you're working in teams, staying focused on being successful and trying to minimize the emotion or your feelings in a particular situation is really the priority.
That's a great story, and I love that. Yeah, all of us have times when someone frustrates us. Doesn't mean we don't need to work with them and work well with them. Yes. So we ask everyone to share with us a resource, kind of a gift for all of us, that you think would be helpful to us to learn more about becoming a good leader or setting a collaborative culture, a safety culture, any of these things. What would you have to share with us?
Yeah, so I read a really, really good book about 2 months ago called Thinking in Bets by Annie Duke. Annie Duke is a professional poker player. And this book is really interesting. It has really nothing to do with poker. But what Annie Duke does is talk about, how one can make informed decisions to improve decision quality. So she talks about decision science, but she talks about it in a way that really breaks it down and applies it to everyday life. I like this book so much, I made it required reading for my 16-year-old and 21-year-old sons. I think it applies to all ages, but it is really important that it focuses in on making quality decisions doesn't always have to do with the outcomes. Too many people think that a decision they made because the outcome was positive means that it was a good decision. And that's not always the case. And she gives lots of examples of that. I think one that's really impactful is, the simple fact that unfortunately there's a lot of people out there that probably drink and drive on a regular basis. And in some cases, those individuals will, maybe live their whole life and never see a negative impact of that behavior. But the simple fact is it's not making a good decision. It's a successful outcome, but it's not a good decision. And I think she talks about a lot of things like that and how to create an environment where you get a lot of feedback from others and are willing to understand and make and adapt to your own thinking based on that feedback. And so I highly recommend the book. I think it's to me, I've actually read it and reread it because I think it's something that's very applicable to me in my career, but also me in my personal life.
I really appreciate that. That sounds really exciting. We will put a link to that in our show notes for this episode so everyone can grab that. That'll be wonderful. How can everyone get a hold of you if they wanted to talk to you a little bit more?
Sure. So you can find me on LinkedIn. You can search for me and find me on LinkedIn. And then there's an external website that you can reach me through for PLI. It's https://PLI Slack, that's PLISLAC .Stanford, STANFORD.edu.
Okay. And we'll put that in the show notes too, so everyone can get that as well.
Great.
So do you have some parting advice for us, Jeff, so that people can maybe start doing something tomorrow to become a better leader and become better at what we do?
Yeah. So, I made a really, really wise choice about 28 years ago when I met my wife and married her. My wife is somebody that's she's a sociologist and she taught sociology for years, but she thinks a lot differently than me. And I think that one of the greatest benefits I've had in our marriage is understanding her perspective, and I think that's helped me grow as an individual, as an engineer that's a very pragmatic person and has low empathy skill at a root. I think that she's really helped me, be a better leader. And one of the things that she's taught me that I think is the takeaway, my parting advice here, is that listening rather than speaking is really the focus. I think, developing my skills to sit and listen to a conversation and try to understand somebody else's perspective helps me really get into the empathy space and understand their situation. I think a really good quote that I heard from Richard Branson is, listen more than you talk, because nobody ever really learned anything by hearing themselves speak.
That's probably true, isn't it? That sounds great. I always tell people you got 2 ears, 1 mouth, probably a good way to look at things.
Yep. I think I've heard you say that before, Suze.
You probably have.
Yeah.
So I want to thank you so much, Jeff, for coming and being a part of our Construction Dream Team podcast and sharing with Construction Nation. We so appreciate your hard work. We appreciate your wise wisdom, and what you shared will, I'm sure, help many, many project teams and leaders think differently or seek out other ways that they might improve themselves. And that's what we all try to do and want to do. And we need to do that for the industry and for our teams. So I appreciate it. Thank you so much.
It was really my pleasure. This is a great conversation, and anything I can do to help, Sue, you've done so much for me. I just really appreciate your ability to support and push across the nation the importance of partnering.
Well, I appreciate that very much. You're so kind. And so everyone, wasn't this a great episode? Share it with everyone. Don't keep it to yourself. Talk about it. What else can you do? What can you learn from this and take your project, take yourself to the next level? We need to always be growing and working to improve. And I appreciate so much everyone listening. And I wanted to share with you some feedback I got last week. This was from Mark von Leffer, who is a director of project controls at Hill International. And he was kind enough to send me this email. Hi, Sue. Long overdue email. Love, love, love what you're doing with your podcast. I've been listening to them on my morning commutes down to Southern California, and everything from the content to the cadence and the caliber of the speakers, it's all very well done. Kudos. So thanks so much, Mark, for your kind words. And thanks everyone from Construction Nation for listening. If you haven't subscribed, you can pop on over anywhere that you get podcasts, iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, really anywhere, and subscribe. And I hope you will. And listen, and remember to go on to constructiondreamteam.com and give us your comments, or go to cdtlinkedin.com and join the LinkedIn group, and we will be having some conversations there. And I hope that you always remember that we drop every Monday morning at 4 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. So join me next week when I will interview another industry leader or expert about the people side of construction, so you can learn how to create your construction dream team. Thank you so much, Jeff. Thank you so much. I really appreciate you being here.
My pleasure.
Thanks so much, everyone, for joining us. We will catch you next time. Take care.